turning yourselves out of the pub and so on. In the last session, Dave Chandler referred to me as a living footnote, as is in my opinion. But I hope to be the main attraction now, rather than footnote. I've got a bit of a chest cold, so forgive me for that if I falter a bit and cough. So here's my talk. More about Bampton, who, when, where, and why. We'll try and answer some of those questions, if not all of them. So you get some idea about what Bampton was like historically. They talked about during the early 19th century about it being surrounded by heathland with no roads. And if you wanted to get to Whitney, you had to sort of orientate yourself and start walking over the heath, hoping you were going to get to Whitney eventually. So really very, very, like most communities in the South Midlands, a very isolated place. And the other thing you need to know is Bampton and Weald, which are conjoined communities. Weald started at the Talbot, the other side, the west side of the Talbot, and up to the church. That's a sort of demarcation line, and everything westward of that is Weald, and everything eastward of that, where we are now, is Bampton. So, very significant because Jingy Wells, I'll just give him his real name to start with, William Nathan Wells, born in 1868, who became the doyen of the Bampton Morris for over 50 years. Let's refer to him as Jingy from now on. Some people say Jink, and excuse me, that makes sense in some contexts, but his grandfather was known as Jingle the Green Pea Wells. And Arnold Woodley said, he always assured me that it was pronounced Jingy. So I'll use Jingy now. So Jingy Wells is going to be the main protagonist in much of this talk. Anyway, he said that all the Morris men were born in the Weald, where Morris dancing originated. Well, okay, let's take that with a pinch of salt. Because he also said at one time that Morris dancing in Weald and Bampton was first known in, I think he said 1538. Can't remember. Now, it's an odd sort of date to bring down, but this is the date that his relatives first appeared in the parish registers. So he's made a mental leap. Well, how old is Bampton Morris? We don't know, but before we can talk about Bampton, really, I think we need to put it into some sort of wider context. So let's have a quick look at Morris dancing, generally. Excuse me. Anybody know how old Morris dancing is? Anybody still believe that it's a pre-Christian fertility rite? Oh, thank God. Because the more and more I see of these programmes that are often now on BBC Two, for example, on the medieval period and earlier, it just seems to me that that culture that they're talking about wouldn't sustain something like Morris. That may just be me, but you may have other ideas. But let's have a look. First of all, I've got my wife is going to be my slide changer. I weren't able to find one of those. So next. Okay. The earliest reference to Morris dancing so far, which was discovered by Mike Keeney here, is 1448 in London, associated with the Guild of Goldsmiths. In a sort of, if I remember, a procession, was it, Mike?
A feast.
A feast, the feast. So they're sitting down having the trades guild, very upper class thing, and Morris dancing performing the feast. Next one, the next actual performance that we know about, there are several statues with pictures of Morris dancing on them. There's cups and things. 1466, the Morris at Lambburn in Cornwall, a few miles south of Padstow. Don't worry, we will get nearer to Bampton eventually. And then 1477, more activity associated with the Trades Guild in London. And 1502, a performance at the Royal Court in Richmond-on-Thames. One possibility that folklorists talk about is the percolating of culture from upper to lower. Well, we don't know that happened in Morris, but certainly there's a well-defined migration up the Thames Valley from the Royal Court. So in 1507 we find it at Kingston-on-Thames, 1513 it's in Reading, and 1560 it's at Abingdon. Or at least references to Morris, we don't have to know what these things were. So, in what I've defined as the South Midlands, basically if you put a point on, say, Chipping Norton, and do a circle 20-25 miles around that, that's the area I'm calling the South Midlands. So it stretches over to the Severn in the west, stretches over to the Chilterns in the east, northwards to the Redlands around Banbury, and southwards by the Thames Valley. So that's the area I'm talking about. So Morris dancing in that area. First see it in 1553 in the city of Boston, May Day, 5 shillings paid to those persons that danced the Morris dance. In 1560 there are details in the Churchwardens account of St Helens in Abingdon, paid for X dozens of Morris bells. Whether they were actually Morris team in Abingdon that we don't know. Abingdon Morris like to think so. And in 1578, the canons after in Northamptonshire, the curate of the church was reputed to be a Morris dancer. Next. Right, here's an interesting quote, especially the final one. Don't go straight to the final one. In Oxford, there was a celebration to do drum and shot and other weapons of men attired in women's apparel. Nothing's changed. Who brought into the town a woman bedecked with garlands of flowers named by them the Queen of the May. They also had Moorish dancers and other disordered and unseemly spirits. Next, Heather. Okay, well, in between those two dates, very interesting things happened. King James I declared in 1618 that Morris dancing should be one of these things legitimised after service by a manuscript called the King's Declaration, which sometimes came to be known in some quarters as the Morris Book. And then Charles reiterated that in 1633. Then we have the Civil War, of course, when the Puritans were like that on it. And there's lots of prohibitions of Morris dancing, breaking up the fiddles, stopping the performances and so on. But none of this is to do with Bampton yet, so you're still somewhere out there in the ether. Anyway, this is an interesting reference. 1646, in Whitney, a group of cavaliers at Whitney waited to invite some 6 or 7 country fellows with napkins and scarves and ribbons tied about them, and bells at their knees, according to the manner of that sport, and with them a maid marrying and 2 fools who fell a dancing and a capering. Okay, here's a shot I took 4 weeks ago. If you think of that reference I just read out, here, except the fact there's no maid married and only 1 fool, is exactly that 1646 reference. Scarves, ribbons, bells about their legs, a fool. This is a detail from a painting by Finkenboom of the Thames of Richmond, and it shows 4 Morris dancers. It's got the maid marrying mentioned in the Whitney Waits thing. It's got a fool here collecting money. It's got a hobby horse, but there's only 3 dancers. And it's a form of dance, if it is a Morris dance, it's a form of dance we no longer know about. So it's two men doing that, almost like a grisette in the country dance. And then pipe and tabor player on this side. But if there was Morris dancing in Bampton in, say, around 1800, which we think there were, I'll tell you why I think there was, then more likely to look like this. This isn't Bampton, but this is probably the Stowe Morris, the Stowe house in Buckinghamshire. So they're wearing knee breeches and white stockings, bells around the legs, top hats. And we know that Bampton Morris used to wear top hats. It's well said that back around 1800 they wore top hats. And there were no bowlers at that point anyway. So. And once again, if you think about the 1646 reference I read out at the Whitney Waits, here is another perfect example. Now, in the South Midlands I talked about an area next. Here it is. Number 4, just down here, middle, about, whatever, foot up. Here, that's Bampton. All the other places are places that had Morris teams, sometime between 1660 and 1900. 153 places identified eventually. They're not all on here. But just look at how many there actually are. You've got Bampton, Clanfield, Buckland, Farringdon, Filkins, Kencott, etc., etc. Just in this small area, this sort of area. There must have been times when you went out on Whit Monday, just walking out to take the air, when every corner you turned, there was a Morris team. And of course, every Morris team you saw, the fool would hit you with the bladder to make you give money. So you must have come home black and blue. As this is the English Country Music Weekend, I thought I'd talk a bit about Morris musicians now. So next, Heather. Here is this thing this side is a chart of 7 Morris musicians and the area they service. So this big one down the bottom here is 25 miles radius from Dennington, because JW at the top is Joseph Woods. Most of these musicians were born just at the tag end of the Napoleonic War, 1830-ish. And he was supposed to have played for all the Morrises around 25 miles around Dennington, which is just above the inner circle. The inner circle is 10 miles from Hayley, and that which is the blob in the middle of that, and the TH is Thomas Humphreys, who was a butcher in Hayley, who was said to provide the pipe and paper for all the Morrises around 10 mile radius. But more interesting for us is JP down here in this bottom corner, which is John Potter, who was born in Sutton near Stanton Harcourt, about 2 miles from where I live, less than that if you walk over the fields. G.P. Wells said he played 4 instruments. Well, we know he played the pipe and tabor, we know he played the fiddle, because although we have no photos of the Bampton Morris before 1894, we do have a photo of John Potter, and that's his top corner, which is May Day 1886 in Oxford, Broad Street, Oxford, and the fiddle player at the left is John Potter. And if you look at the thing hanging out of his coat, it looks rude, but I think it's a sort of a canvas bag in which you get his fiddle. So that's Potter, who played here in the 1850s. But he also played for all the Morrises for miles around, so we're looking at Farringdon, Leafield, Stanlake, so many, you know, just cogs. And another player, not on this map, who played here in Bampton for the Bampton Morris in the 1870s was Gypsy Lewis, born Boswell, Thomas Boswell, but later adapted the surname Lewis on the death of one of his uncles. It was to do with the gypsy taboo. So Thomas Lewis, and here he is at the very bottom left, no right, I'm a bit dyslexic, very bottom right, playing for the Abingdon Morris in 1910. He died about 6 weeks after this, so we're very lucky to have a photo of him. So there's Gypsy Lewis, who played at Bampton in the 1870s, John Potter, who played at Bampton, pipe and tabor, not the fiddle, pipe and tabor in the 1850s. So a rare glimpse of some musicians. The long tradition to make your own instruments out of anything you could find to hand. Here's a photo that, thanks to John Jenner, who just sent it to me. Here is Wells with one of his early homemade instruments. It looks like a cigar box or something. He called it a skeleton fiddle. I'm not actually sure what the next made of, but I suppose it could be bones. And goodness knows what it sounded like, because clearly you couldn't put enough tension on it to make it do a concert pitch. So it must have been very slack. And we'll never know because nobody ever recorded it. Even though that photo was taken in 1935 and there was all the recording devices available at that time, nobody ever thought of recording playing. But anyway, this is an example of, I suppose, what has come to often be known as the hump and scrump, which is something made out of wood and cigar boxes and anything you could find, basically, old piano wire. So this is where this homemade fiddle. Of course, there's no evidence that any of the known Morris musicians at Bampton or anywhere else played anything like that before the Morris dance. Right, here is the earliest known photo of the Bampton Morris. I believe it dates from 1894. And I'll tell you for why, because we'll talk maybe a bit about Percy Manning later, yes, in a minute. But Percy Manning was difficult. A man quite independently wealthy. His family was independently wealthy. Mike Keeney is just doing some research on him. And in all the senses, he's living on his own means, so he's not really working. But he was at Oxford. Was he a don at Oxford?
No, he failed his exams.
He
took the place and got them, but he was just...
Okay, thank you. Right. Well, he's a very interesting character because he somehow became interested in the popular culture, if that's what you want to call it, or the traditional culture of the area. For example, it's he who's in fact ultimately responsible for the whole of the folk revival because he paid 2 of the old Headington dances, Headington Quarry dances, the side which had lapsed for 10 years from public performance. In 1890, the winter of 1898, he paid 2 of the old dancers to teach a new set of men to do the Headington Quarry dances. And then in March 1899, he gave a talk at the Corn Exchange in Oxford, in which the Headington Quarry, the newly reformed Headington Quarry men danced. Now, I'll just tell you about the folk revival. Over the course of that year, they went out a few more times. They went out at Whitsun and other times in the summer. And then, on Boxing Day, Cecil Sharp saw them in Headington itself when he was staying with his mother-in-law's. And William Kimber at that point was playing rather than Mark Cox, who was the revival fiddle player. So Sharp took down Kimber's tunes on the piano, played them back to Kimber, who was astounded that anybody could have done that. These were family tunes passed on from his father and grandfather. And thus, in effect, was the folk revival born. But, here's an interesting thing. 2 weeks earlier, the Headington Quarry side had danced at a fundraiser for the Boer War, which had only just started then. I believe it was October 1899, the Boer War. So, rather than the story about, oh, they were all frozen out of work, so they decided to go out on Boxing Day to get some money. But they were already doing it, because 2 weeks earlier they were actually out and dancing. So, anyway, there's, to my mind, the folk revival story is built on a bit of a myth because of that. But Percy Manning, back to Percy Manning. Anyway, he hired a man called Thomas Carter, who variously described himself as a geologist and fossil hunter, thank you. He paid Thomas Carter to go around many of the local villages and record details of the old Morris, and to try and buy any artefacts, like types of tabers, cake tins, so on. Even costumes. I believe Manning owned a costume at one point, didn't he? So, Thomas Carter came into Bampton in 1894, dyslexia here. And although I don't think Carter took this photo, he was certainly here on Whit Monday and had details of what happened at that point. And I believe this is 1894. Stop that. So here we have the core of the Bampton Morris, which has been going for, I'll tell you in a minute. We have on the left, we have Harry Bradman, which is Jinky Wells, who's the Fool in the Middle's uncle. George Wells, which is also Jinky Wells' uncle. Joey Rouse, Jim Tanner, James Dew, George Dixie, and Thomas Tanner, and Richard Decimus Butler. He had a brother called William Clemens Butler. His father was Edward Butler, actually, was a very interesting character in his own right. He was born in 1813 in Mr. Lovell and moved around a lot, but he kept a dancing booth. And what's interesting is that only 20 feet from where we're standing, Butler erected his dancing booth here in the square on various feast days. So essentially a dancing booth was you paid money for each dance, usually a penny per person, and then the fiddler would play country dances, all country dances in two ways, two lines facing each other. The fiddler would just play until they dropped, so often he was playing an hour. It must be quite a small canvas booth, because if you look at the area out here, the head swings around about as well. Anyway, Edward Butler moved to Bampton, and he played for the Morris here between 1876 and 1880, when his son, Richard Decimus Butler, took over and played from 1876 onwards. Here's the same set, the same composition, except for one person. 3 years later, she's taken outside of Talbot, where later on, when Cecil Sharp came down to collect the dances from Arthur Dixie, who was said to have been the best dancer of his generation. And in fact, Joey Rouse, who's one of the dancers here, said that Dixies were the best dancers at this point. When in 1912 Sharp came down to collect from Arthur Dixie, at the Talbot, there was such a social divide that they made Arthur Dixie go round the back to the tradesman's entrance. They would never go in front. These are the first shots of Bampton in action. Sorry, it's not a very good one. I couldn't find a better copy of this. These are taken from the window of the Talbot, first floor window of the Talbot. And here is the set in action, and there are 3 more others of this hill taken at the same time. But it's interesting. Nice tight set. Look, not like they dance now. Butler are playing fiddle here at the right. Wells moving through the set. You can't see it very well. It's just behind the dancer there. Sword collector, the sword and flower on the top there. Just here, the old man on the right, the brother of the lead dancer, who did a dance for himself, but was now too old to dance, and said he would stand in and do it, just carrying the coat there. Probably 1903, I'm not sure, somewhere within 2 or 3 years of that date either side. But it certainly shows Arthur Dixie in the middle. His 2 brothers, George and Thomas Tanner, Rouse, Wells now playing the fiddle. So here's the story that is commonly known and accepted. In 1899 they were out dancing on Whit Monday, and because the fiddler and the fool and the cake carrier didn't have chance to dance off all the free beer they were given, like the dancers who would just sweat it out. Dick Butler, the fiddle player, didn't really like playing for the Morris, even though he had done it for 23 years. No, hang on, sorry, 19 years. He was coming down Church Street, and they got to the corner there where the post office used to be, and he caught his fiddle neck in the standpipe. And as he moved around the corner, it snapped And apparently he said, "Oh, thank God." Jeannie Wells, who was that year fooling, who was that year fooling, "Hang on, chaps, we will not stop. I will run home and get my fiddle," which he did, and they continued to the end of the day. So this is Wells' first playing for the Morris. So you don't have to go on your hands and knees, sir. Wells' first playing for the Morris, probably in Whitmundy in 1899, and he played right through, including most of the war years, until 1948. I mean, what an incredible achievement, just under 50 years, probably 50 years to be counted. We'll say more about that later. But Wells, was well steeped in the traditions of the Morris because his father died when he was very young, when he was 5, and he and his brother were left with their grandparents. He had been a Morris dancer. His grandmother's father, Thomas Radband, born in 1776, had been the pipe and tabor player and carried the cakes. And given that a set of bells was said to have been Thomas Townsend, presumably he danced as well, while their mother went off into service in London. So they were left there. So they were actually brought up amongst, all the talk had been about the Morris, and then they learned all the tunes, the songs associated with the tunes, the traditions behind it, much of which is now lost, alas. So, Wells talks about working in London in 1887 and getting a call to come home on Whitsun because they had no one to go out and fool for them. So the one man short, it was the Jubilee year, Queen Victoria's first Jubilee, and don't know why they didn't have someone to fool, because more or less anybody can fill that. You just have to dress up and just do nothing more. And, so the best fools do lots of things to make you divert the crowd sometimes, but you could just. But anyway, Wells comes home and he fools for the first year. So he's 19, and then he becomes a dancer while somebody else fools, and then let's say in 1899 he takes up as a musician. But I mean, here's a man, as I say, steeped in the Morris and so passionate about his culture, and not just the culture, not just the general Morris culture, but his family's involvement in the culture. And how many of his relatives were and had been for at least a century in the Morris. And this is a significant thing to remember in 1926 when I come to that, so we'll wait for that. But, okay, another one from 1903, so let's put it there so you can see. It's not very good. Frida Bradley gave me this photo, so thanks for that. Next. Okay, I think this is 1907. Now, Cecil Sharp, he went to see Kimber went to see him in Headington in 1899, and then Sharp wrote down the tunes and completely forgot about the Morris until Mary Neal in London asked him, maybe about 1905, in addition to the songs that she was working up and teaching to her kids at the Esperance, well, in the East End, she said to Sharp, "Are there any dances that we can do?" And Sharp remembered Kimber, whom he'd seen 6 years earlier, and he sent her to meet Kimber, and so which resulted in Kimber going up to London in 1906 for the very first time of many times going to London, and teaching the kids of the Esperance Club some of the Headington Quarry dances. Now, Sharp becomes enthused again, and he publishes the first volume of the Morris book in 1907. Now, in the local one of the local newspaper accounts for that year, it says, "The Morris dancers went out in their new costumes," implying a sort of Renaissance of sorts. Whether these are new costumes is difficult to see because it's not very clear, but it's clear that although the Morris book probably hadn't yet appeared at Whitmundy 1907, there was a lot of newspaper coverage of the revival in London and how Morris dancing was becoming a done thing amongst the kids, and then later the Esperance Club sends out teachers all over the area. In fact, word on it told me that once he was in Leafield in the 1960s and he found a complete set of men who could do the Morris from before the First War, but it wasn't the Leafield Morris they were doing, it was Headington Quarry, and they'd been taught by an Esperance before the First War. So, there's something of a Renaissance in the early years of the 20th century. Right, this is the first year that Cecil Sharp actually comes here, but before that, comes here on Whitmundy, but before that, he's had various dancers teaching him the dances, especially Jeannie Wells. In September 1909, he gets Wells to come and spend much of a week in Stow-on-the-Wold, where Sharp has hired a house, and Wells teaches him the tunes and teaches the dances to Sharp's kids and other people's kids, and gets Wells handsomely paid for it, which I don't think he shared with the rest of the Morris dancers. But his first Whit Monday of coming to see the dance in situ, and it's probably the first time he ever saw a full set, was here. So this is 1911, and look how wonderful they look. Again, really tight, really very elegant. And of course, I remember Frank Tanner telling me, that's a son of Buscott who's here in the middle with the moustache, Frank telling me how light on their feet all the old dancers used to be, and how graceful it was, and Wells echoes this in his manuscript, which again I'll come to later. But they just look so good, don't they? And it's fantastic. 2 years later, in 1913, but before that, in 1912, a man called Clive Carey comes here and interviews all the dancers and notes down all their dances. So that exists as notations and tunes. And in fact, back in the 80s, I published a series of little booklets, and one of them was the Clive Carey Bampton notations, long since out of print. If you do see them, they demand a huge amount of money, none of which comes to me. But so here's 1913, and the interesting thing about this is the last year that several of the old men are involved. See, Thomas Tanner, who's standing just behind Wells' elbow here with a moustache. You know, by this, he was born in 1806, so by this time he's 50s, nearly 50. He gets something wrong with his leg, which eventually has sort of amputated. So this is his last year of dancing. In this one, his son is in it, the one in the middle, John Tanner, and this one is his brother, Thomas Tanner is the older. This is his brother Charles, and two of his sons are in it, Jesse and Percy. So it's essentially it's a changing of the guard almost, where the old men who danced for at least a decade together give way to some of the younger men, which is the way it must always have been. Because we know, for example, in the 1860s, that in addition to a male side here at Bampton, they were teaching a team of youngsters. So there was a kids' side as well, some of whom later were absorbed into the grown-up set. So, 1913, and another one from 1913 just to show them in action. So I'm not blocking anyone's view here. This man's asleep, just give him a nudge. Okay, 1914, not long before the war started. Now, this is a photo you will never ever have seen. This is a set of 5, if you can call them a set of 5 photos I bought a month ago on eBay. Duncan Broomhead, the Morris Ring archivist, emailed me and said, have you seen these negatives on eBay? No. So I went straight on, and the dealer was asking £95 or offers. I offered 80, and he accepted. I mean, I'd have paid 180 if he'd have had it. Because here is a set of photos from a year for which we have no other images. But, as I said before, it's the changing of the guard. Here we see almost a very young set. We see the 3 Tanners who were in the previous 1913 photos. We see Jingy Wells, who's sort of standing here under the eave of a house. Jingy Wells' son Bobby dances for the first time. He was then a 16-year-old. So enjoy these 4 photos which you've never seen before. Here they are processing. And in addition to the 6 dancers, they've got this young boy here. I don't know who that is yet. I'll try and blur up the faces and take you around some of the older people in the village, if they know. Interesting, because that's if that is indeed a processional dance, that's something that's not known anymore. And it's not the way they do Bonnie Green dances now, which is their final dance, which is the raising of the hats and dancing around a circle, they're dancing off. It's something else, it's like a procession. Here they are. Now the man in mufti here, we saw him in the first photo, and he was carrying Wells' coat in the first photo, but this is the spare man that they always talked about. They always took a spare man around, just in case one of the old dancers needed a break, or flagged from exhaustion, or had to go in the pub and have a drink. And then the spare man stepped in, and here is the only photo I know of a spare man stepping in to a Morris set. So as Wells playing, again, they look a bit iffy there, because they've just started to vary the movements, because here's a man with his hands up when everybody else's hands are up. And the 2 lead dancers here are on different feet. You see them. And here, I thought for a while that was Session Sharp, but I just had a chat with Mike watching it, but we don't think he is. But I suspect, as Mike does, but it's one of the major collectors. I'm not sure if I do yet. It's something that requires a bit of research. And I think this man here, standing at the extreme left, is Sam Bennett from Elmington. But here's Wells doing his famous knuckle-down jig, playing the fiddle while doing it. Something that very few men have ever done. I only remember Andrew Bathe and Matthew Green, as other people doing it. A very difficult thing to do. So they're at the forefront of 1914. Last time before the war, obviously. And they go out one more time in that year. They go in August bank holiday. They go to Reading Regatta. Two sons of Charlie Tanner, who joined it a couple of years earlier. And by this time moved to Rains Park in London, or near London, to work for Sutton Sea. So they had to come back to Reading for this regatta performance, which they were getting paid £7. And they were told not to collect, because they were getting paid money. And they had specific times to go on. Well, of course, the two Tanners who were coming from Rains Park missed the train. So instead of going on at 1:30, they were supposed to, they couldn't go on until after 2 o'clock, which made the organiser furious. And Wells talked about getting the brunt of being shouted at and saying. And then later they say, well, we've got the collecting box here, let's just take it round. So, of course, the organiser gets really annoyed at this as well. It gives Wells a real dressing down. We're paying you money. And we were told not to collect. But they do anyway. And then they have so much drink. What else to do? The little changing tents they were given to change it from their cottage to their cottage. They're making a horse's ass of themselves, and they knock down the central tent pole, and it falls in, thus exposing 7 of the dancers in déshabillé half the trousers down. And which again, Wells has to take the brunt of the organiser's tongue lashing. Anyway, finally managed to get the £7 out of the organisers. And they go back to Bampton on the train. There was a train here at that point, which Dr. Beating managed to close in the early 60s. And they go back on the train, and it's very difficult because it was filled with servicemen. They all said, oh, we're going off to war. So, I can't remember when just go forward, Heather, do your next slides. Okay, go back. Because that's just distracting. So, many of the young men are called up for war, obviously, as everywhere. 4 of the dancers we saw, go back to, Heather, will you? Okay, that's enough. 4 of the men here who were dancing went to war. 2 of them were killed. 2 of them came back shell-shocked. Yeah, we just can't conceive what it must have been like. And Harry Radland, who's Duke Wells' uncle, who's there carrying the cake, he dies also during the war. So it's another changing of the guard after they just changed from the older group to the younger group. Suddenly war intervened and changed it again. But even though many of the young men went off to war, Wells still managed in 1915 and 1916 to take out a set with only of 4 men. He had 2 young men, probably his sons, we're not sure, and 2 of the old dancers dancing in mufti. And there's a photo, but I could only find a very poor reproduction, so I didn't bother looking it up. A photo of them taken in 15 or 16. And the 2 old men were the old dancers Jim Tanner and John May. And the vicar said to Wells, "It's amazing, Mr. Wells, how these old men in their 70s can still do it." They've got 2 old men in their 70s doing it now. Why shouldn't you do it? I'll just divert slightly, I think I've got plenty of time, just to talk about John May for a minute. In 1869, he was already a dancer at that point. He was transported for 10 years to the colonies, Australia, for rape. So he obviously wasn't available in that 10-year block to dance. But he came back to Bampton, presumably everything was forgotten, and he was still there in 1915-16 when he just made up the set before on with Monday. So that's 15 and 16, Wells takes a small team out, but in 1917 he can't raise enough men, so there's a gap. But there's a sort of a light on the horizon. Some would call it a light, some would call it a black cloud. I'll tell you why in a minute. He gets asked by one Oakey at Alderscott, keeps the pub there. Alderscott's about 3 miles from here, 2 miles, very close anyway. He gets asked to train a set of Alderscott men to do the Bampton dances. So he gets paid, he goes over, he teaches them, they dance outside the pub in Alderscott once or twice a while. We don't know how many times. But one of the men that he trained was called Billy Flux. Now, Rolo just asked me about him. He remembers him dancing probably 1952, just doing a jig, and how elegant a dancer he was. Little Billy Flux, they call him, about that tall. And he used to dance, foot up, and kick his, I can't do it now, ouch. And kick his free leg up, almost touch his bum, apparently. And in fact, there is film, which we've got to show some people later around my laptop. But anyway, Flux is one of the men. He also goes to war, but he manages to do some dancing at Alderscott. Now, in 1915, he's married the leader of the Morris at that point, Thomas Tanner, who, sorry, can't know photo, but he was the one with the moustache I'm telling you about. He marries his daughter. So he's now related to the Tanners, who considered themselves the leaders of the Morris before the First War. So, what was that? Thank you. That's first-hand knowledge. So no Morris dancing here in 17 and 18, although what I say, well trained at Alderscott. And in 19, enough men had come back, but it included two of the men he trained at Alderscott, so Billy Flux and Jack Taylor. Jack Taylor was still alive when I started collecting. I interviewed him. He was on the bungalow on the corner of New Road. He remembered all the men, the names of all the men who'd been in the team at Alderscott with him. And he remembers he danced as a Bampton Morris dancer in Whitmond in 1919. And when it came to the end of the day, they were having a share out of the money, and somebody, one of the dancers said, Taylor shouldn't get the same amount as us, he's so young. And Jiggy Wells said, he danced the same as you lot, he's getting the same amount of money. That was one of Jack Taylor's fond memories. But that was the only year he danced, because by the following year, 1920, enough Bampton men, or wheel men, should we say, had come back to form the set. So we start off here in the 20s, and I've left out all the invitations they had. They went up to London before the First War. I told about Reading, they went up to London twice. They start getting invitations to go all over the place, and in a sense they're the only traditional team, well, the word traditional means, still left. So they are lionised, they are put on a pedestal. So they get lots of invitations, and one of these was to go to a fete at Stamford in the Vale, where a princess and royalty were. And Wells tells of all the men that they were provided with beer at this fete, but it wasn't strong enough for them, so they walked over the fields to the nearest pub. When they were away, the princess was brought up and introduced to Wells, and Mr. Wells had to do his 3 dances, which he fiddled and played. So the knuckle down jig, which you saw next, that one, knuckle down jig, was one. He did the broom dance, and he did one other which we don't know. So, but when the men came back, apparently they were very jealous that Mr. Wells had met the princess. that would teach you to be a load of trumpets. Okay, I'm going to show you these next 4 because they again have just surfaced, and they come to me courtesy of the Bampton Community Archive. The archivist is filming at the moment, and she gave them very kindly to me. They've only just recently come in the last couple of months, so we now see these, and I believe them to be from 1924. So here we are. I can't really say much about them, except that here's the new group of men, including 2 other of Buscott Tanner's younger sons, Vic and Reg. Buller, they all had nicknames, Buller and Scudgel, kind of nickname. Ted Lay, again, who I got to know quite well in the 80s. And Billy Flux, here at the end, a little short house. So I'll just show you these 4 and say nothing, just the fact that you've never seen them before, and they make a wonderful set of photos. Here they are, look like they don't know what they're doing. She's probably through one, just talking to a woman with an umbrella. He was always one for talking to the minor gentry, the people with big houses and so on, and very genuine, doff his hat to them and so on. And yeah, so there we are, Whitmond in 1924. Okay, next. Oh, that's not what I can say. These are such fantastic photos. And I was going to just comment that how amazing that, that the Bampton Community Archive has been set up is a wonderful thing, because people now see a permanent place where valued or even not valued photos and other things to be placed, which they know will be cared for. Okay, which is fantastic. And it's a shame that more locations don't do it. I was just an entry last week, I thought, how wonderful there's an entry community archive how many old photos of the Morris might come out then. But you know, when I was collecting the engine, I noted of at least 3 photos that never surfaced. And maybe they are still from somebody's house. Another invitation to Stanford in the Vale, not the 1921 one, but I'll just say this in Wells's own words, because it makes more interesting really, or babbling. Okay, Billy Flux, the little man we saw who kicked his ass when he danced. I've glossed over the fact that in about 1922, Wells taught a series of boys, most of which never joined the older team, but they were dancing down the square around the corner here. And he also taught some women at the Women's Institute, which Ada Tanner, who was the wife of one of the dancers, and was the granddaughter of Edward Butler, who had the dancing booth, told me that she was one of these women in 1922, but they never rose to a public performance. However, there is a newspaper account saying the members of the Women's Institute danced at their due. And so, so this is from Wells' own manuscript. He wrote in, well, the first one he wrote in 1914, but then he wrote a second lob, as it were, in 1937. And these were for a long time in Halsey Manor down in Somerset, where Roy Dominic managed to see them during the 1960s and transcribed parts of them. And then the manuscript vanished. So if anybody knows that they've got Ginny Wells' manuscript in their house, please tell me now. Anyway, Wells says, in 1937, then came the final Whit Monday, that's 1925. Brooks, the man with the box, was of course amongst the spectators. William Brandon Brooks. Photo of him in a minute. I'm looking after my playing for the dancers, says Wells. A gentleman doctor from Stanford spoke to him. He made out he was head of the troop. That was the Cape Town. They had a big fete in Gala coming off. Did he think the Morris would come? They would pay us well. He, that's to say the Cape Town, never said a word to me, that's Wells, about it. And he gave the man his address. He, Mr. Flux, that's the little man who kissed the bum, and the 2 Tanners settled everything, but they forgot one thing. They couldn't go without me. That's to say Wells, the musician. So, Mr. Flux came up in his big way as the new leader of the Morris, a snake in the grass. I was quite surprised. I'd seen Brooks and he never mentioned a word to me about a job in Stanford. They had, I found out, been to a lot of trouble to have it well advertised, so I said, yes, I will go out for their sake, but it will be my last outing with you. And given how long he'd been in already at that point, 30 years, and how deep his family had been involved, this must have been quite a wrench for Wells to have said that. I'm no longer going to be involved in the Morris. This will be my last outing with you. They only laughed. They didn't think I meant it. The gentleman came to fetch me in the car to mark out a little piece of ground at Stanford and brought me back to my door, and they were all very jealous. The day came and there was a... Oh, this is the one with the princess, sorry, the early one. The day came and there was a lot of grand people there as the princess was coming to open the fete. They gave us beer, but when we'd done 2 turns, the band gave us the rest, and off they trooped across the field to the nearest pub. You've already heard me paraphrase this, sorry. And left plenty of beer behind, not strong enough for them, but not one of them stopped behind with me, and it was lucky I stopped. But 4 or 5 ladies brought the princess across to see Mr. Wells do his 3 special rounds. They were furious when they came back. We finished up, and were ready to start home, and they wanted another hour's drinking at the pub. What else? Nothing changed there, anyway. I never went inside. I stood out in the road and amused the villagers and children. They finished up drunk and came to fighting. We got home and they parted the money. I had finished with the old plots as well, as the young ones then styled themselves. But for over 20 years, the old lot, even if they liked to drop a beer, they were honest and stickers. The next Christmas, that's 1926, was near. They said to my youngest son, Bob, your dad will come round and go out with us as usual. I don't know so much, says Bob. Dad says what he means and sticks to it. They came up to me and pleaded, but I said, I have finished. They wrote to 2 fiddlers, a man from Carston and Mr. Bennett from Ilmington, and they had a lovely day, and a lot of people were here. They had a good day. So, in 1926, for the first time since 1987, Wells doesn't go out with the Morris, any Morris, but the old team, the Tanner team, goes out. And at the right here, we see Bertie Clark from Bampton, from Carston, was in Carston at the time, although he lived all over the country and he'd been on the railways, and he'd been in a sort of railway-type Harmcourt orchestra playing the violin, reading from music. And he played for social dancing in Canada, where he led a lot of square dance tunes, but nobody ever recorded those from him, more pity. But you can't quite see it there, but here's a music stand, which he's reading from. So if you look at him, there's a man who's going behind him, and then there's a music stand in the dance. Now, because he didn't know the Bampton shoes, they sent to London to get sharp notations of the shoes so that Clark could read them off the stave while he played the Morris Men 26. Now, again, Ada Tanner said to me, I think he'd learned that he didn't really need the music, but he used it as a sort of a prop, as it were. So here, according to the local newspaper, it's the first time ever in Bampton Morris history that a man had read from music while playing. So, Clark stays with them for a long, long time, but Wells doesn't go out. Here's another one. Here's Billy Flux doing his gig. Clark, he's obscured by that, but there's his music stand looking more like. On the left is Sam Bennett from Ilmington, who also played that day. So the next year, Wells is so miffed that the Tanners had usurped his position as essentially the carrier of the Bampton Morris tradition, that he raises a young side. And for the first time, since I suppose the boys' team in the 1860s, two sides go out on the street of Bampton on Whit Monday, 1927. And here's the old team, Bertie Clark playing, Billy Flux in the engineer, Thomas Tanner, who's one of the old dancers, but now by now. So this is the old team, they go out, and this is the team that Wells raises. And a lot of young men, some of them are his relations. I could name them all, but I'll speak to anybody afterwards if they really want to know. Ruth will be able to tell us who they are. So the two teams are dancing around on Whit Monday. They don't come to blows as far as we know. They manage to avoid each other just like they do now when there are three teams. So this situation goes on until 1933. Two teams go out every year. And then between 1934 and 1940, only one team goes out. And then there's a final fright with the old team in 1941, when people come back home and dance. They're in service, and some of them come back and dance. And Bertie Clark plays for the last time, for now. So I told you they're invited to all sorts of places, and one of the knock-on effects of being involved with Sam Bennett, who's the second fiddler in, on the right, was because he lived in Ilmington near Stratford-on-Avon, he arranged tours for them, 2 consecutive years, 1929, that's this one, and 1930, for them to go and dance at Ships on Stour, Anne Hathaway's house in Stratford, outside the Shakespeare Theatre, whatever it was called at that point. And they generally have a good time. And again, I won't go into the personality involved, but various of the men that Wells had trained are in this set. They've changed allegiance and gone into the other team, as they still do. The weather has always been odd, and you wake up on Monday morning, you're not quite sure what it's going to be like. But how often does it happen that there's a flood? This is the Edmund Castle, now no longer with us, and this is Wheeled Arches down here, and there's a brook just beyond where that house, where that barn is. There's a brook. It's come over, and as you can see, it's 4 or 5 inches deep. Well, they don't want the Morris dancers to get wet, and here in the centre of town is a slightly elevated position, so when you get in the middle, there was no flood of water here, that's how it's called. So, the people carrying over the flood. So here's the old team, Bertie Clark with his fiddle on the left, and then here's Wells's team being carried over the flood. Wells on the right there. So they managed to do it without getting too wet. Okay, again, this must have been a great honour for them. In 1935, there was an international folk dance festival organised by the English Folk Dance Society, held in London, and we had teams from all over the place, dozens and dozens of teams, including one from Nazi Germany, and there's still film from that occasion, and you can see the German team with the Nazi flag. Didn't matter at that point, particularly in 1935. The Bampton dancers were invited to go. This is them dancing in Hyde Park in 1939. The man with the Union Jack is William Kimber from Hayden Quarry, and welcome. And here they are. And the fool here, who is George Punch Smith, I remember interviewing his widow, and she told me that this was one of his choicest memories of being in the Morris when they went to London. Dancing in front of a huge crowd. You can see how huge the crowd was to be, because this is just a part of the onlookers of the background of the top one. Okay, the war ends. Jingle Bells manages to take out a team during the war, because a lot of the men were on protected occupations on the land, so they didn't have to go out to fight. And I mean, at least one year they only went out with 4 men. The first years they went out with 6. And Francis Shergold, who's Ruth's brother, and later became the team leader, told me that every year his commanding officer allowed him to come home with some dance during the war. So most of the money they collected was given to the Red Cross. and the Spitfire Fund. So they basically did it altruistically and they went out. Anyway, here's the first year after the war, 1946, Wells playing, Roy's brother Francis at the back here, second stanza in. Again, I can tell you who these people are. The man with the hanky over his face, that's Ted Dixie. He's the son of Arthur Dixie, whom we saw in the 1903 photos. So here's another generation continuity, because they had those three brothers, the Dixies, dancing in 1903, but their father, Henry Dixie, had also danced in the 19th century. So that's three generations of Dixies, at least, possibly more, going back that we don't know about. Anyway, here now in 1946, and again, I say the war, although the austerity of the war and the petrol rationing and so on is still in effect, the English Folk Dance Society reorganises, because there was a Stratford-on-Avon Festival earlier, reorganises the Stratford-on-Avon Festival. And here they are, that's May, late summer. And the man in the middle with the funny hat, that's Douglas Kennedy, who was the president of the Folk Song Society. President, what's the name? It doesn't matter. Dancing in the set with them. In 1947, the man who's the same uniform is, again, Ruth's brother, Roy Sugar. Apparently, on this day, it's another beer story. If you don't do it like that, Bill Brown, who'd been one of the dancers as well as trained in 1927, went out in the early part of the day at 7 pence. But he just couldn't dance. So Roy, there in the uniform on leave, had to step in. I mean, he'd already danced, first in 1940. So, he was in 15, I think. 15. So he can train during the war, but here he was. And he went out for the rest of the day. And Bill Brown's place. Nice photo. Through now. Okay, this is quite a well-known photo, but it's interesting because it shows four musicians. And this is 1949. The Henry Quarry Men, who'd only just reformed the previous year, came over on Monday to Bampton. And amazingly, there is film of this occasion in colour. No sound, but in colour, and I can show it to anybody later on my laptop. But here's Bertie Clark, who's now a regular musician, because Wells had finished playing the previous year. He was in ill health and later was bedridden. But here is Wells playing the fiddle, sitting down. William Kimber sitting next to him. But here, in the hat near foreground with the trilby thing on, is Sam Bennett. So here are four of them, well, probably the four major informants on the various Morris traditions. And I find that quite a moving photo. Simon Bennett obviously tried to learn what Wells was doing, whether it was intently at it. As is Kimber, but Bertie Clark particularly listen. Outsiders have often been invited to join in Muffley for one dance, and the very first reference I've got is 1924, when George Cook, who was at Oxford University but later went to Cambridge, came over on his motorbike from Oxford to Bampton on Whitmonday, and he got in conversation with some of the dancers, and they learned that he did it at Oxford, as one of the Oxford men. They said, "Oh, do you know Maid of the Mill with Chapping?" He said, "Yes." "Oh, you'll be doing the next dance." And that was the first known outsider in it. Anyway, here, in 1954, these three men on the outside, Russell Wortley here, this side. In the middle is Webber. Now, I can't remember his real name. Anybody remember it? Anyway, when I danced with Stafford Morris in the mid-70s, he was still active in the Fool. And at the back, I think, is Geoffrey Metcalf, the then Squire of the Ring. Because this was the year that Jiggy Wells had died at the very end of 1954. So the Morris Ring of England had this cake tin, which is described to Jiggy Wells as on, given to the Morris dancers. In fact, given to Francis Sherborne's Morris dancers, which is interesting because he was the inheritor of the Wells tradition. But in 1950, Arnold Woodley, who'd been dancing for a couple of years in the one set, I saw his diary for this year, it was very interesting. Little handwritten thing. In March, 1950, March, played for the Morris practice. April, left the Morris dancers. I'm sure Ruth can tell us why this was, but I'm not going to gossip now. Well, you know, various stories. But the story was, and Ruth might be able to correct me, that basically during the late 40s, Arnold did the teaching, Francis did the organising for Whitmonday, where they were going down. Anyway, Arnold really leaves in some sort of puff, I think, and so March, played for the Morris practice, April, left the Morris dancers, May, new Morris team. So Arnold trained a whole load of boys to go out and dance. I haven't got any photos of that because, as I say, over those who But so from 1950 until 1959, Arnold teaches many of the boys in the village, some of whom go into the grown-up set, including Ruth's husband's two brothers, Rex and Pete Wheeler, who were taught by Arnold, but then went into the main set led by her brother Frank. And he once showed me a list, I think in 1980, he showed me a list of all the dances he taught, and it was something like 55 dances that Arnold Woodley had taught between 1950 and 1980. Amazing. So, anyway, we see Ruth's brother Francis just to the right of Bobby Wells, and we see Arnold Woodley being spiced by the cake, his face being sliced. So here are the mixture of the two teams on that year at this ceremony presenting the new cake tin. And are you still using that? Okay, yes, there you go. They're still using it. The side now led by Craig Godwin. So Francis passed, I won't get around to showing you first, but Francis passed to Tony Daniels. Tony Daniels retired this year and passed it to Craig Godwin. So if you're coming tonight to the Cayley where they're going to play out, you'll see that side and Matthew Green's side. Okay, now Francis told me that during the 1950s he was often quite embarrassed to be seen walking down the streets of Bampton in his Morris kit because it was sort of so poorly amongst the locals, and often when they went out they could only find just enough men to field a set of four. So the only time this ever happened on a Whit Monday, it often happened at Fates apparently, it only ever happened on Whit Monday 1959 when it was such a low spot for Bampton Morris that they had to draft Russell Wortley, he was right in the middle there, and that with a funny hat on. Russell Wortley is fool. He was somehow found in the smock on the day. They must have arranged it in advance, because this man with the playing the fiddle up here on the left is Jack Newton, who came from Whitchurch on the children's. So he played the music. There are four dancers. There's Ruth's brothers, Roy and Francis. Peter Allen right at the very extreme right, who might be cut off, and John Knight. Bobby Wells was the king. So here we are going for the first time ever, and only time on Whit Monday, four dancers. Well, since the First War, four dancers. There's one more shot from this year, just I put in just for interest. And Francis said, it was easier with four men because you just missed out on business. You didn't bump into anybody in the heads. So there we have. Now, this is really, I say, the low spot, and really, Ruth might correct me, but the received wisdom is that Francis wasn't going to take a team out that year. It got that to that state. But they heard that Arnold was going to go out with his boys' team. A few days before Whitsun, possibly the day before Whitsun, we don't know how quickly it happened, Pete Allen, one of the dancers, came to Francis and said, Arnold's not going out after all. And Francis said, oh, well, we'll have to go out just to be a representative of the Morris, we have to keep it going, as it were, to break. So he gets together, as I say, Brother Roy and John Knight and Pete Allen, and they get this ad hoc group together. And then it all changes. It goes from this really the low spot, and it starts to be out of graph in front of me. It starts climbing until it comes to 2005, just so like that. But in the next year, Frank Purslow, who by this time is dancing with the Abingdon traditional Morris, walks over sometime before Whitsun to see Francis in his garden. Excuse me. Francis tells him that they've got, it's a really fine restaurant, they've got nobody to play for them. So Frank says, oh, I've got a friend in London who comes every year to watch, who plays the fiddle, and he knows the tunes. And Francis says, oh, what's his name? Reg Hall. So, 1960, I haven't got any photos, well I have got, but they won't be enough to put up, from the following year. So, on Whit Monday 1960, you have three musicians, you have Reg Hall, you have a concertina player from Gloucester, who wouldn't eat the food that Francis' wife had prepared for him, because he was vegetarian or something. And one other player from Oxford, who could only be there for the morning. So the man from Gloucester played the concertina, didn't play very much at all, if at all. The man from Oxford had to go at lunchtime. It was probably he who, when the maid of the mill was called for, he said, "Which virgin?" And Russell went and said, "Bampton, you fool." But so Reg was the only one who stayed for the whole day, and he's still playing all these years later. So where are you? So 56 years later, Reg is still playing for Morris. Incredible. He's almost matched Jiggy Wells' record. He may in fact broken it now, if not, maybe next year. So let's say 1961, with the help of some outsiders, you have to say, sort of Reg Hall, who is playing, Roy Dommett, who carried the coach, and gave Frank Perslow, the fool in the middle there, and then a group of local men. So, and then they never looked back, really. Bampton Morris goes from strength to strength. That's not what I'm saying here, it's interesting. He showed Alec Wixie in the middle, who himself went on to lead one of the teams. I see him running down the time. They still go out to fates, and here's one, you know, the race doesn't come down to London all the time, but Frank Perslow plays for them. Sometimes we go to the late 60s, but some Townsend who is just seen behind Francis Sherlock, his head, who starts with the Tanner set in the 1920s first, becomes a part of Francis' team. And even Arnold Woodley, who by this time had no team of his own, from 1960 on, from 1960 to 1970 there was no other team. Even Arnold Woodley claims at Financial Whit Monday, although his uncle Dean Buckingham, who was one of the old dancers, didn't like that. And whenever he saw a man, he used to drag Arnold away. This is the other team. So they go to Ireland in 1967, but on the urgings of Frank Perslow, who by this time had now moved to Weald to live and work, Arnold gets a new team together. So in 1970, you had two teams again, and this is Arnold's first team in 1970. And that goes on for a couple of years. He gets the boys' team together. 1973, seniors, Bob Bailey in the middle playing. Fred Scott, and Frank Clay. My favourite Bampton photo of all time, the admiring the Airfix kit. Still faded Beresfield. On the extreme right is Matthew Green, who now leads one of the Morrises, and who's giving a workshop this morning. There's Andrew Day on the next one in, looking directly at the cameras. Next one looking at the cameras is Fred Scott, who still dances and plays for them, and various others. Okay, I love that photo. Early in 1973, both Arnold's team and Francis' team get invited to go to the Albert Hall to dance there. So they both go up, apparently all very amicable. But Arnold has, say, a grown-up team and a boys' team, and this time the grown-up men say, look, this is the only chance we're going to get to go to the Albert Hall. We've got one of them here, actually, Trevor Hewitt. This is the only chance we're going to get, correct me if I'm wrongly about this, Trevor. This is the only chance we're going to get to the Albert Hall. Take us, because next time you invite you can take the boys. So they took the women's team, they danced very successfully, and then Arnold gets asked to dance at the tea dance at Cecil Sharp House on the Sunday afternoon. Now, some of them have gone down to the Favourite in Holloway to listen to the Irish music, and when they come back, Arnold says they want us to dance, and they say, I really should have had Trevor come up here, I'm sorry, but they say, we'll dance, but we'll dance all weekend, our whites and dirty and that, and we'll dance in our regular clothes. And Arnold said, this isn't good enough. Did you actually dance at the tea dance?
We did. In Mufti.
In Mufti. So they actually danced in their regular clothes.
Arnold was in his whites.
Yeah. So they did actually dance at but on the way back, and I've collected 20 different versions of this from 20 different people who were there. Either Arnold gave them all the sack for insubordination, or they decided as a man to leave on block. Anyway.
He wrote us a letter, Keith.
Yeah, I'm just getting that, actually. Arnold subsequently writes them a letter demanding the return of the kit. And the story I've had until last night was that Fred Scott brought his kit back. He folded up his bowler and posted it through Arnold's letterbox. Although last night, Trevor, who was there and was one of the people who got the letter, told me that Bernie Basson, who was Arnold's deputy, also did the same thing. So, a few months later, Whitson, 3 teams in the village. Francis' team, Arnold's boys' team, and next. And here are what we've known for many years, the Rebels. Or the Breakaways, which is the men's team that Arnold took to the Albert Hall, and we were given the sack and left. Just to balance it up, I thought I'd have one of Francis' side. This is a period when they had a boys' set as well, so there's so many of them. You just think back when they only had 6, and now here they have like 20. And what that does, it reflects the fact they no longer need the money that they collect on with money. It reflects the affluence of the time, basically. So instead of, and in many, all recent years, until they stopped a few years back, they had a party in the village hall, which they used the funds they kept on with money to pay for the food and so on. But they no longer need the money because it was a time of certain happening. Anyway, next, we're running down to the end now. Next, okay. So here we are, 4 weeks ago. 21 dancers, 3 musicians, 2 of whom are here. Fool and the sword bearer, that's Francis, then Tony Daniels, then Craig Goblinstein. There's Rachel, second in from the right, still playing. Next is what was Arnold's team, now led by Lawrence Adams. He had about 10, I only counted about 10. 3 musicians, Fool and the sword bearer. Next, and here is what, and that was the Rebels, but now the team led by Matthew Green. About 15 dancers, 1 musician, Fool and the sword bearer. So around 45 dancers in all, performing on the streets of Bampton on Monday. Think back 100 years, there were only 6. And I was going to sort of put one photo next to another where you saw the crowds in 1897, which were there were about 15 people watching, and the crowd of 2015 when there were like 100 people watching. Which just, again, it shows the increased popularity. So, it's one of the country's best loved customs. Although, as I said in the blurb in the introduction, very few people who come to watch or indeed who dance know very much about the history of it. Some of whom have been here today, and I hope you've learned a bit about it. And I'll leave you with a piece of advertising. And if you remember back to the advertising campaign, all because the lady loves milk tray. And you see 3 Bampton dancers in the middle. Okay, and that's my lot.
Can I just make a comment? That I was at that Albert Hall show in 1973, and there was a distinct ooh went round the entire Albert Hall, because Arnold Woodley's team didn't do a whole trip, they did back to back.
Right, yeah.
And it was a ooh.
And presumably also at the hay, because instead of doing the figure 8 hay, Arnold taught cast from the bottom and up the middle.
Yeah.
So it's like, and I mean, the reason for that was told to me, Arnold said that I couldn't get the boys to do the figure 8 hay. But they still do that. Lawrence's team, who are the inheritors of the Arnold team, still do that hay. And in fact, if you come to the game tonight, they're going to try and field 6 men who talk about Arnold Woodley, and they'll be doing that on 12 hay. I think they're rather than figure 8. Okay, anybody else? I'm sorry, I haven't got any milk tray to give out. Yeah.
Double steps and single steps. When did they change from double to single steps?
Good question. And the answer is we don't really know. But certainly in the 19th century you would imagine doing the double steps as a 1, 2, 3 hop. But film recorded in the 1920s shows that each man did whatever they liked. Some were doing the 1 hop, and some were doing the 1, 2, 3 hop. So the only time it ever really came together formally was when they were invited to the Albert Hall in 1967, when Peter Allen said, look, we're a bit scrappy, we need to get our lines and what we do worked out for this performance. And Francis said to me, you could always tell me because I was always on the wrong foot. So if all the men led off on the left foot, Francis would always lead off on the right. And at that point, they made him lead off on the left. But because it didn't matter. It didn't really matter in a local context. But when they were dancing in front of thousands of people in the Albert Hall, then presumably it did. Although, I've seen film from that year, you can hardly see them if you're sitting way back in the tiers. You can hardly see what they do. Doesn't matter if they're leading on the left foot or the right foot. But again, I can show people that film if they want to see it. But just a final bit about that. Arnold Woodley always insisted when he taught there was the 1 hop, 1 hop. But son Townsend, who was his fool for so many years, if you ever saw him dance, he would always do the 1, 2, 3 hop. And when various people in the Woodley team picked up the 1, 2, 3 hop, Arnold would say, no, you're doing it wrong. So I don't. So it doesn't quite answer your question, but it sort of gives it an edge.
The original picture, Keith, where's that from? The original photo, the 1890 one, where's that from?
It's turned up in the village. Various people had a print from it, but I don't know who took it. I'd like to think that Thomas Carter and Percy Manning had it taken. But we just don't know. But certainly I've seen three original prints in the various people in the village.
think you mentioned, Morris actors about the Yankee grandmother dance, Morris with the Bampton.
Okay, the only person that known to dance, the only female known to dance in kit was Jingy Wells's mother, apparently. Although I knew all sorts of women who could do the dances. In fact, I imagine Ruth, you were able to do the dances. Yeah, but I certainly remember interviewing Kizzy Buckingham back in 1980, and she showed me a complete jig in her living room. She could do it. But the only person who dressed in kit, and this was, I think it was 1873, just before she went into service in London, which I mentioned, and she went out as one of the men, but somebody caught on, and the leader, her father, said, "You better go home, my dear," because people now realise you're a woman. Apparently she was doing so well that nobody noticed. And why not? She was as steeped in the whole tradition as anybody else whose family had been doing it for a century or more. Anybody else? Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.